I'm going to start by sharing my screen and Dr. Promil and everyone, is that visible to you all?
It is. It's up there.
Perfect. Right. I'm just going to try and hide my face from being in front of my screen.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, you can see me. I don't want to see myself. So yeah, well, we're all set, Sunny. So we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. This has been fantastic 2 days of women, climate, and insecurity discussions, and we are very excited to now contribute to the panel on women's environmental leadership. So this is a presentation that is going to focus on the state of Uttarakhand, the North Indian state of Uttarakhand, and we will also be discussing a case study through which we'll hopefully be able to highlight what we mean by the women being warriors. And I think we'll not be alone in saying this, because all the presentations that we've seen so far and the discussions that we've seen so far have highlighted just the same. So my name is Dr. Madhumita Pandey, and thank you for the lovely introduction, Sunny. With me presenting is Dr. Promil Pande. She's the founder and executive director of the Siddhast Foundation. And this is also my first presentation with her. She happens to be my mother-in-law as well. So we're very excited to talk about a place that's very close to our heart, because both our families come from Uttarakhand. In fact, Dr. Promil Pande is currently presenting up I think you're on Zoom from Ranikhet. So she's very much in the region. So the themes of the conference are women, climate, and insecurity. And hopefully we will be touching upon those. But I think the two sub-themes that our work will highlight will also be the feminist economic theory and climate insecurity, and also providing this space for marginalized voices and rebuilding the eco-feminist archives that India's known for, that the state of Uttarakhand has contributed greatly towards. So in terms of climate change, you know, this year has been fantastic because a lot of discussions have been around women's role and women's leadership and climate literacy. And this is something that, of course, has been getting highlighted since the last 2 decades as climate change remains one of our greatest threats. But at the same time, we're starting to recognize how men and women experience climate change differently. And there's been so many reports and so much evidence from international organizations, from governments, policy documents that make it very clear now that the most vulnerable and marginalized will also be the ones who will face the greatest impacts. And unfortunately, we increasingly see that the most marginalized people continue to be women and children in most societies around the world. So it was fantastic that Vidya in her keynote was able to set up, and even Rakhi in her presentation was able to set up the stage for a lot of the discussions that we'll be able to now have quite smoothly in terms of the, you know, Vidya, you mentioned women work harder and longer for less returns. Absolutely. I think that's what feminist discourses have long argued as well, that when we talk about economic policies, we are not able to bring women's experiences to the forefront because historically, the idea of men's lives and labor has dominated these arenas. So when we look at women's labor, both inside and outside, it is quite underestimated and quite underrepresented as well. And we see that this has a direct impact on climate and on environment, because women contribute heavily in farming, in agriculture, in animal rearing. They are also the ones who have to bear the burdens of natural calamities. They are left to do the survival work, and at the same time, they are the ones who are also tending to their household. So, so the image on the right is from Almora, and you can see the women collecting forest litter, which will eventually be used as animal bedding in the animal sheds. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot on ecofeminism. This is something that we all have some idea about. And Raki also mentioned ecotourism, something again that is proving to be quite useful and fruitful in areas like Uttarakhand in particular. And we saw that there was quite a rise in it even during the lockdown. We also see a lot of city dwellers going back to their native areas, back in the hills and back into more open and greener spaces. But I will talk a bit about what Mary Mellor has to say when she draws the parallels between how women are treated and their status and role in society, and how the nature around us is treated. And she puts it quite well that when we talk about ecofeminism, it's essentially a movement that sees a connection between the exploitation and degradation of the natural world, as well as the subordination and oppression of women. And this was also wonderfully highlighted in the UN Secretary General's speech on International Women's Day this year. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I've got a tiny excerpt that again sums up a lot of the points that we've made and some that we'll be highlighting through our case study. They talk about how, we obviously are celebrating women and girls everywhere, but their ideas, innovations, and activism that are changing our world for the better, they need to be highlighted. This year's theme reminds us that they bear the brunt of climate change and environmental degradation, and we need more women environment ministers, business leaders, presidents, prime ministers, everything that some of our wonderful panelists and keynotes have also indicated. And hopefully that is something that we will see in the near future. I mean, it is starting to happen, but again, I'm not going to focus on the bleak things. I'm going to try and focus on the hope for what is to come. Now, again, sustainable development goals have been mentioned, and all countries, organizations at a local level, at an international level, we're all striving quite hard to achieve these goals. But something that gives me immense pleasure is that we are constantly recognizing, and we have this inherent awareness now, that at the heart of these goals lies gender equality. And what a fitting thing for us to be in a conference surrounded by women talking about climate action, So definitely, I think when it comes to gender equality, we have to look at even the climate crisis needs to be looked at as an opportunity to move further towards gender equality. So I'll give you a bit of a background about the state of Uttarakhand, and then I'll let Dr. Promil take over and deep dive into the case study. So essentially, you see the circled portion. So it borders with Nepal internationally, with China, and it's this beautiful, beautiful state in the hills, and it's popularly known as the Dev Bhumi. And as a child, I will never forget how many temples I have visited with my parents on holidays. So yeah, it's a land of the gods. It is home to the Himalayas. It's got beautiful rivers, flora and fauna. I mean, 86% of the state is covered in mountains, and 65% is covered by forest. So the urban centers, now the issue that comes is that you've got these urban centers in Uttarakhand, and they are vulnerable to the problems of both the disaster risks as well as the climate change impacts that we are seeing now. When I'll talk a little bit about the disaster risks in the next slide, but when speaking of women have played a very, very significant role in the state of Uttarakhand, and they have constantly been hailed as the backbone of the society, of their communities. And it is a sad reality, though, that we do see them being disadvantaged and excluded from various aspects of social and economic sectors. However, there's been quite a lot of changes to that as well. And the progress that we've seen over the years, so there are two things that the state is very, very proud of. Three things, actually. I've mentioned two here, and the third one I'll speak of shortly. There's a dense and a high forest cover that the Forest Ministry works really hard to maintain. And there's also the literacy rate that's above the national average for India. And a lot of credit for both these things goes to the Chipko movement. So, the climate action history is something that this region boasts of. So the eco-feminist Chipko movement was where, as you can see in the picture, and I'm sure you would be familiar with the movement where the women use their bodies to hug the trees from being cut down. And ever since the 1970s, the women have been coming together. They are resisting unsustainable practices of modernization, as well as trying to battle and combat other social issues, such as alcoholism amongst the men. And they've contributed greatly to this social movement as well. Now, this organizing capacity of the women, you can see this in a number of different initiatives. It's continued on throughout the last couple of decades, but ever so even now. And this is something that, while of course I'm going to take pride in Uttarakhand, but it's amazing that Vidya and Rakhi were able to highlight this for the regions that they are doing the work in. And I'm sure that's a lot of work is happening around the country as we speak. So the challenges, some of these will be familiar and again, overlapping and wonderfully highlighted by Vidya and Rakhi as well in some ways. So you've got farming, irrigation, and land rights. We know that women work harder. We know that women get paid less for the labor. They do have other burdens that they have to bear. Slowly things are changing, at least in the area of land rights. The second big issue that remains is alcoholism or addiction. And of course, if this is something that's plaguing the men in the society, then that's taking them away from being active agents and contributing agents. And therefore, again, women get that extra burden falling upon themselves. Then we see large-scale migration in this region. There are two main reasons for that. Of course, given the topography, given the lack of jobs and the distances between villages and urban centers, a lot of the times men do tend to move out to either other urban centers within the state or completely outside the state. So, Delhi is a popular urban center, the capital where people often come to work. So you see large scale migration happening. And as a result, you're leaving behind essentially the older people and the women and children in the villages. At the same time, Uttarakhand is also this hub for the Indian Armed Forces because we have 3 regiments here. We've got the Gorkha Regiment, we've got the Kumaon and Garhwal Regiment, and I think almost every other household at some point had one male member who had enlisted in the army. And I take pride in that because my maternal grandfather also served proudly as an officer of the Indian Army. So you do tend to see that men move out, men migrate, whether for better job opportunities or whether it's through their enlisting in the army. And then finally, we see the 4th challenge of climate insecurity. This is a region that has seen forest fires, it has seen flooding, it has seen landslides, glaciers melting. So again, when we do see a lot of these challenges, the people who have to pick up the pieces or have to be leaders in such adverse situations, they turn out to be women. So what I'll do now is I've set the stage for Dr. Promil to come in and talk about the case study of Basanti Didi from Duarson. And hopefully through that, she'll be able to elucidate some of the points that even the other panelists have made for our theme. So over to you now, Dr. Promil.
Thank you, Madhumita. Am I audible?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So good afternoon to our moderator, Sunitur, and to all the other fellow panelists as well. And everyone's presentations were very insightful. So thank you so much for the opportunity of to be part of this conference. So in our paper or in our presentation, we present Basanti as a case study. However, I would like to highlight that she is not unique in this case because she is one of many Kumaoni women who have been agents of change, drivers of change, and have in their own way been steering various movements and enabling their own communities, both of women, young children, young women. So through this case study, what we propose to do is we propose to highlight the role of women in their immediate community and how it feeds into and has a ripple effect on the sustainability goals of the region. And in addition to that, in a way, it's also a way to give space to marginalized voices and rebuild the eco-feminist archives. So regarding Basanti, she was born in Ramnagar, and she was the younger of two siblings. And she lost her father at the age of 5. So her father, I mean, as Madhumita had shared earlier, one of the challenges is finding employment in the hill region of Kumaon. So typically her father was a case who was influenced by or impacted by the push factors, whereby he needed to seek employment outside of the hill region and had to work in Ramnagar. So Ramnagar typically is the Bhabar region of the hill state. And he would work there for 4 months, making tobacco pouches for a local bania or a merchant. And that would enable him to earn some 5 to 10 paise, which is less than a pence. And this would sort of enable them to run their household, because food security, so to speak, was provided by tilling their own fields. So the 4 months that he would spend in Ramnagar, he would be spending the rest of the months tilling his fields and tending to his own land in the hills. However, at an early age, her father took ill and he died due to the illness. And early on in life, Basanti had sort of seen the significant role that her mother had taken on, as the mother had become the main support of the family for herself and her elder sister, whom she refers to as Didi. And during the course of her father's illness, she had watched her mother cut grass to sell to the sais. So these are horse and pony keepers in the region. And again, she would not earn more than 15 paisa, which again is around a pence. And this money she would use then to buy household provisions for the children. Now, due to poverty, Basanti and her sister were unable to pursue an education. And in addition to that, her mother had both the daughters married off at an early age. So for the early years post-marriage, Basanti was living with her in-laws in the village. And 3 years later, she joined her husband in Delhi, because again, her husband had moved out of the village seeking employment opportunities. And typically Delhi, Lucknow are areas that people move to. So she had 3 daughters when she was in Delhi. And it was when she was expecting her 4th child that the situation at home had become grim, because her husband had taken to drinking and he was unable to support and contribute to household expenses. And this had become a cause of concern for Basanti. So that is when she decided that staying on in Delhi and having her children not fully fed, it would be a better recourse to move to the village, back to her mother, who was a huge support to her and encouraged her to move back to the village to enable the upbringing of her children, promising to help her. So we see that her mother was instrumental in supporting her and her children. And this enabled Basanti to work as a laborer and do other jobs to enable a living and an education for her children. The elder daughters are now happily married. And the 4th child that she was expecting, little did she know that they were twins and they were boys. So these are the 2 boys you see in this photograph on your left. And the boys, so the daughters are also educated. So she managed to put the girls through their school education. And because the boys were the youngest, and she had managed to sort of build up enough economic resources for herself, the boys were able to pursue higher education. So the young man on the right, he managed to complete his engineering. And the boy on the left, he did his MA. And both of them have managed to secure good jobs in Delhi. And they are pursuing and living a very dignified life. So today, Basanti is a happy woman. And she is a proud landowner and a house-owning resident of Kumaon. She presently lives in the house which she inherited from her mother, even though she does have a stake in her in the property of her in-laws. She chooses not to claim it yet. So maybe it might be her children who might want to stake claim, but for now she doesn't want to claim it. She has, in the meantime, successfully managed her household and her children. And she contributes greatly to her community because she is respected as for her leadership skills and to her great contribution and inspiration to the women in her community. Recently, there was this, so leadership, talking of leadership skills and motivating her, the women folk.
Sorry, Promil, just to let you know, you've got 2 more minutes.
Okay, sorry. All right. So let me wrap this up fast. So yes, today she doesn't complain. And in fact, she doesn't like to be recognized as a victim. So this is much in line with the, I think, Freya's presentation yesterday, where she refers to women not being referred to as victims, but rather as agents and drivers of change. And this is how Basanti likes to be referred to as well, and which is acknowledged by the village community. Also, I think Basanti stands tall because much in line with her name, which translates into spring in Hindi. She seems to have been a new season of blossoming joy for her family, and which has enabled them to withstand all obstacles in life. Yeah, so that's Basanti for you, Madhumita.
Thank you. So we'll quickly conclude, and of course, we'll be happy to share more information on the case study. But you know, something coming from India that we take great pride in is how women are represented in our mythology, in our society. So you know, you've got Devi, which is the great goddess. You've got Shakti, primal energy, and you've also got Prakriti, which is nature. Now, it is, of course, with a heavy heart that we say that they do continue to remain inferior to men in many aspects of social functioning. And we've seen that through various sectors: health, education, rights, and freedom. But we do want to point out that over the last 2 decades, there has been a steady shift in women's roles and contributions to society, and this is being widely recognized. As Dr. Promil said, Basanti is one of the many Kumaoni women who have demonstrated what happens when women are given freedom, power, and resources, because as we know, empowered women are agents of change. So we'll conclude by saying that in spite of their vulnerability to climate insecurities, women are active agents and effective promoters of adaptation and mitigation of climate change. And we can only hope that we continue to provide them with the right tools to continue down this important path. So thank you so much, everyone.